I just stopped by the bookstore and talked to whose wife? Yeah, there she is. And the other day, a couple of months ago, we live in Huntsville, Alabama now. Been there about a year and a half. And somebody put together a program and advertised it. I was going to be out at the PX, the Redstone Arsenal, signing books. So there's several people there. A guy came by, a friend of mine, he said, Leo, you're the only guy I know trying to become a millionaire, $1 at a time. So go ahead and buy the book. It's another book. Thank you for having me here. I've been here before, and General Metcalf and General Hudson just met. So it really is a pleasure to be here. You're bright. You understand what aviation is, and you're interested in what our careers were, and it's a fun thing to be involved with. And I first learned to fly, and I got my commission, my wings, and got paid to do it. Being a fighter pilot, until I got shut down, it was the best job I've ever had, and that was just a little bit of fine print. But I was very blessed to be allowed to fly fighter airplanes and whatever the current airplane was at the time, the state of the art. I've often said when I ejected, I was doing 600 knots. My backseater, Harry Johnson, he survived. Electronic warfare officer. I was Wild Weasel. I think you people know what that is. A lot of people don't. Our job was to go in first, find surface-to-air missiles, which was the first war that there were surface-to-air missiles, and as you know, it took away a chunk of airspace. And the war in North Vietnam was just an air war. There's no ground war. But we lost that airspace, so our industry, military, there were people right around here and others got together, designed those black boxes, put it in a two-place fighter. In this case, it was a 105. You have one here. And put an electronic warfare officer in the back seat, EWO, and an experienced driver, pilot like Leo in the front seat. And as you know, they called us Wild Weasels. The first 5 Weasels that went to Takli, Thailand, got there, and they felt pretty good about this brand new mission and job, and they were saying to these guys carrying the iron bombs, dumb bombs, as you know in those days, they said, kind of have no fear, we're here, we'll take care of those SAM guys, and all that stuff. And 45 days later, all 5 crews were gone, or all 5 airplanes were gone. And so Harry and I were the 6th crew to get there. And as you know, normally it's nice to have a wingman. It was kind of difficult to get the ops officer to schedule anybody to fly with us because we're going to go in there and troll around, and the odds of getting shot down were about 2 or 3 times as much as the guys carrying the iron bombs. And so what we ended up with is they gave us the dregs of the wingman. I mean, guys, they were. There's nothing wrong with lieutenant colonels, but but we were. I was a young major at the time, but anyway. These guys, the lieutenant colonels, they've been flying multi-engines. They've been flying bombers or MATs or something, and they weren't trained as fighter pilots. So the fighter pilots, they cycled through the system by the time I got there. So now it's kind of their turns. They went to this RTU, I guess we call it, to learn how to fly a 105. And they get over there, and you get up there in North Vietnam, and it was a violent environment. You're yanking and banking, and you're keeping a good airspeed, and you got SAMs and flaks, and you're jinking, and and you're in there just trolling around. There's no set plan. You're just waiting for Sam to fire at you so you can find him and then kill him, assuming he doesn't get you first. But I was losing my wingman, so I was spending more time, or as much time, trying to ease into turns and so on. So at any rate, eventually, being about 2 missions later, I said to the ops officer, "Look, I gotta give me some young guys, give me some lieutenants that don't know any better." But some of those lieutenants, I'd trained at Nellis Air Force Base, and they'd been there a little before I did, and they weren't real happy to fly with me. But I said, we'll have a good time up there, whatever I said. And so, but the very first mission, I got these lieutenants. There were 3 lieutenants, and I put the I put the most inexpensive as number 2, and we got up, and we were still up north of the Red River. We'd hit a couple SAM sites, and I don't know, there were MiGs around always, but anyway, all 4 of us survived, and we were able to stay in there till the guys in and out, and it's our turn to go out. And so, but we're still up north of the Red, and I called, Green 2. I said, Cadillac. I said, Cadillac 2. I said, go ahead, lead. And I said, take us home. Where's China? But it just is more accident, I think, than anything else. But these guys were, as you know, as a young lieutenant flying in combat, and you're going for 100 missions, they're going to see somebody's wing. That's all they're going to see for 100 missions. And all of a sudden now, here's a guy, and we're still up there. There's still, some danger around. And so from that day on, I had people volunteering to fly with me. And it was just these young guys, because it was, and as we know, in any job that we have anywhere, there's so much knowledge and smarts and motivation in young people, and depending on the job, is how much authority you can give them. But it was the best leadership I'd ever shown. It was by accident, but it really worked out well. And they were better wingmen. They kept track of what was going on, and the whole mission improved because of that. Just I want to mention. I'm going to try to be. My talks are so smooth, but tonight I'm going to jump around a lot. And I didn't say speech. I just give a talk. But I want to mention a couple things that I hope have analogies to any job, whatever it might be. One is teamwork. At Tockley, where we were, I'll drop down 3 levels. The first one is the people on the ground that were fighting the airplanes. The crew chiefs, the maintainers, the weapons people, the people putting the right fuse on it, even the weather people. Everybody was involved on the ground, giving us. And when we were there, there's cycles when all the maintenance people belong to a maintenance organization. Sometimes belong to squadrons. That's gone back and forth a lot. Over there, the maintenance guys the people belong to the squadron, so we were kind of a cohesive unit, and so we got to know them better. But they would if there was one little gig on that airplane, you came back in the afternoon, you write it up, and they'd stay up all night. The next morning, it was like we got a new airplane. They were so good and so dedicated. And when we took off and flew, the maintainers, when they had some time, they sat out there on top of the revetments. And we came in, they counted. There's 1, there's 2, there's 3. And if we were missing an airplane or two, I mean, they were just crushed. Especially if they found out it was their airplane, saying, "Did I do something wrong? Could I have done better?" But it was just a great team effort, and so we were given great airplanes. Number 2, the wingmen I picked out, they became very dedicated, and you pick out guys that would stick with you, and they'd fly through a bunch of flak, and they'd have trust in your leadership, and you gave them some authority. They could put bombs on target. They had good eyeballs. Pick up a spare MiG or a surprise MiG or SAM launch, and would hang in there with you. And so those wingmen and every team has got a key person, no matter what that is. If it's your marriage, well, it's a joint effort. But no matter what it is, there's always a person that's key in that team. In my case, my key guy was key person in that team was Harry Johnson, my backseater. He knew so much about electronics. In fact, he knew too much. I'd say, "Harry, what's that signal?" It sounded like a rattlesnake, some of the signals that they'd set it up so when Sam starts painting and so on. And so Harry says, "Oh, yeah, that's it." He'd start explaining to me what the antenna looked like. And we're up there. You were thinking, I'm thinking about staying alive, and I'd say, "Harry, I don't. It's going to kill us or not? That's all I need to know right now. Maybe tonight we can talk about it." But Harry was just so good at what he did. He got us out of trouble sometimes before we were in trouble. Plus, he was cross-eyed. He could be calling out stuff coming out of the cockpit, and he'd say, "Leo, we got to make it 5 o'clock." I don't know how he did it, but anyway, the point being, maybe I overstressed the time on teams. If all 3 levels of that team did their job well that day, we were successful. If any one level of that team failed that day, we were either dead or we were prisoners of war. Most of the Weasel missions were near Hanoi, so if you're shot down, you weren't going to get rest out, any chance of that. So, but I've never had such a great lesson on teamwork and how vitally important every level. No matter what you do in this organization or place else, your job is important. Just to pick out another, maybe an analogy, and I want to talk about focus for a moment. When those first 5 Weasels that we lost, they got there and they thought they had. Well, it was a steep learning curve, and it wasn't their fault. We didn't know how to do it. By the time we got there, Harry and I read everything about the loss reports. Anybody, wingmen that flew with them, we learned as much as we could about why they lost those 5 airplanes. And Harry's from Iowa, and I'm a Minnesota guy, so we're both rocket scientists, and grew up on farms. So we had this yellow pad of paper, and here's what they did. And then we said, "Okay, is there anything we can do?" We didn't do any of those things. We said, "Those are out." So we tried to come up with some ideas, and we did. We came up with some different ways. We decided to go in at a higher altitude, and SAM travels at SA2 travels at 3,000 feet per second once it accelerates. And so the way we set it up is try this one. And I wrote to the Fighter Weapons School, and I said, "Look, if we do this, do you think it'll work?" And they said, "Geez, you might give it a try." And what I suggested we were going to do, and what we did was, we went up to 18,000, 20,000 feet, kept a pretty good Mach. As soon as we got a confirmed launch, and there were 2 or 3 or 4 of them you're painting now, and Harry sort of. As soon as we got a confirmed SAM launch, I'd crank the airplane quickly, it was either by 3 o'clock or in my 9 o'clock position, and my wingman knew what was going on. I was aware of Cadillac. I'd say, as soon as we got that launch out, they'd see me crank it around, they'd start closing a little bit, and I'd say, take it down. Cadillac, take it down. We all rolled in the burner, plug it in the burner. We point our nose about 70 degrees straight down, 70 degrees, that's not quite straight, down. And we were trying to pick up about 600 knots. We still got our bombs. We're still, the big old 105 would do it. And I'm watching the SAM come in. My dive angle, I kind of adjusted it so that I could put everything just right here, whatever just right is. And let me just stop for you. The ground is getting really big fast now, okay? And I'm watching the SAM. It's arcing down, of course, because it's going to cut me off. They always fired 3, 6 seconds apart. But you didn't worry about number 2 and 3, so you were concerned about 1 first. And so I'm watching that thing, and when it's a mile to a mile and a half out or so, and that's it's about like a telephone pole, a little bit fatter, but portion, that's what it looks like. You see it. And when it's a mile, that's 2 or 3 seconds out. It's literally 2 or 3 seconds out. And if I did everything just right, I punched my mic button. Well, first let me say, this is where I learned focus. Okay. If you're not focused now, probably you never will be. I just punched my mic button and say, pull. And all 4 airplanes, we swap ends as fast as we could. If we did it just right, we did 2 things right. We didn't hit the ground and we didn't hit SAM. And the first SAM usually would hit the ground if we got low enough. And slam it here, and the second one was about here, and the third about here. And then we'd back in burner up, we'd roll in. And now we can find it. And the reason we were doing this is because a lot of sites were camouflaged. But once they launched at you, it leaves a contrail in certain atmospheric conditions. Dry season, it kicked up a bunch of dirt down there. So now your odds of finding that SAM site are real good. So that was, but it worked pretty well for 92 and a half missions. But a little bit. So I think those. I hope those analogies have some meaning. The focus and teamwork. A little bit about we all who are in the working world are preparing for the next job most times and hoping to get a promotion or move on to the next job or whatever it might be. And as fighter pilots in Vietnam, the job none of us wanted, but the job we all knew we might get, was being a prisoner of war. And it was the last thing, it was the worst job in the world we think about, but also every day, or most every day, we lost somebody either killed or captured or shot down. And the preparation I had to get this, take on this next job, my personal mantra was do what's right, help others. I just developed that from the time I was mature, an adult, which is well after I was 18, but I started thinking about certain people I respected more than others. Why is that? And I started figuring out, so they do what's right, regardless of the consequences. They do what's right. Or other people, including my daughter. She was always helping others, and she'd pick out little girls that didn't have, they didn't fit in school very well. But she was just do what's right, help others. Those are 5 great words to live by. They work together or separately. That's part of my makeup. That was my mantra. Also, we knew the Geneva Convention. In that war, there was still such a thing as the Geneva Convention. There still is, but as you know now, if you're captured now by terror, or in Iraq, now I think you're more of a hostage. I mean, the people who are captured nowadays, I don't have any good answers when you talk to them. But so it was. We had the Geneva Convention, and we hoped that they wouldn't abuse it too much. We had the Code of Conduct, which you're all familiar with. Doing like every attempt to escape and all the kinds of things. You follow the senior ranking officer. And also the other thing that gave me a degree of confidence was we had a lot of friends. My wife and my daughter and I, we were a typical family, and I'd flown with some of these people in the fighter business for many years who went ahead of me, and some of those were shot down, and some of those were announced as being prisoners. And I thought, well, I know those people, and we'll know them well. Sam Johnson, or all those people we knew over there. And I thought, well, they made it into the system. Obviously, they still got their honor and their integrity. And if they can do it, I can do it. So I didn't want the job, but that was my preparation. Floating down, atoll, right up the tailpipe, didn't see the MiG. Orbiting the valley, we picked up and accelerated the launching strike and right up the tailpipe. Instantly came apart. Harry and I ejected about 600 knots. We'd seen airplanes hit badly, and the guy's trying to slow down to get into a safe ejection speed envelope, right? Slow down, you're less chance. But but oftentimes they didn't get out. The airplane implodes or explodes, and so they didn't make it. So Harry and I said from day one, just about, if we're hit badly, we're going to go right now, regardless of speed, and we'll take our injuries, but we're going to survive it. And that happened. The airplane was coming apart, and my knees went straight sideways. Harry hurt his back badly and some other injuries, but we made it. But floating down, a couple things are still vivid in my mind. One was I was still 4,000 feet in the air, mountain jungle west of Hanoi. It was afternoon. It was a little clearing. It was kind of dark in there. Your adrenaline's flowing, and airplanes were zipping around. And I caught my attention. I looked back, and there were muzzle flashes. They were shooting at me. Now, this is true. It's hard to hide in a parachute. Really hard. You get a real pucker factor on that one, I'll tell you. But two other quick things passed my mind. One was I was totally devastated. We were on our 93rd mission. We were as good as we were going to get at our job. We'd shot down a couple MiGs. We'd killed more SAM sites. We were sink weasel, so to speak. And yet there we were floating down. And I knew it had to be my fault. I'm the pilot. I'm in charge. And my thought was, some of the friends were in prison. Some had been shot down days, months, weeks, years ago. And the wife and family didn't know what happened to them. It's a terrible thing to put a family into that condition. And I thought, it's my fault for floating down. And if I'm killed when I hit the ground, will my family, my wife, my daughter ever find out about it? I mean, I felt like a total failure to my family because I realized what they were going to go into because the bad feeling. But the other part of it is, and I kind of say this phrase, I think everybody has a better, fuller life if they have some spirituality. Okay, believe in something greater than self or whatever. In our case, in our family, our spiritual happens to be Christian. And while I was floating down, there was this voice it was just like it was a little tape, just a roll-up going over and over and over. It kept saying, Leo, you're going to make it. Leo, you're going to make it. Leo, you're going to... I'd never had a prayer preemptively answered. I liked that a lot. That was the Lord, no question, that was the Lord talking to me. One other thing, by the way, if you got your priorities sort of slipped into being, it's important to have a certain kind of car, a certain kind of house, a certain kind of clothes. When you're floating down, when you look down, you see them shooting at you. With a snap of a finger, your priorities are back where they ought to be. I mean, all of a sudden, those things aren't real important, or your bank account or something. I won't go into much on prison, on Hanoi, 18 days and nights, heartbreak. You've all heard about the heartbreak, the name of the little cell block, and knobby walls, cement slabs, stocks like you see in cartoons, little circles that go, and your feet fit in there, and they're too tight, and your ankles bleed, and there are sores on them and stuff. A very difficult time. And at some point, hooks on the ceiling, just a lot of really bad stuff. And at some point during those 18 days and nights, and I don't know when it was, first day or last day, somewhere in between. But anyway, I went past name, rank, serial number, date of birth. And they broke me. And it was bad failing my family, but at that time it failed me. It was terrible, I'll never forget it. And I remember I tried to cry and I was past tears. And I thought, well, I'm not worthy of living. Maybe I can die. And I said, you're in stocks. They got 2 feet in the hand in stocks, and they're watching your control of your life. And then I thought, well, if I survive this, however long it takes, I hope they don't put me in with another American because these are the guys I know, and they all made it, and I didn't. It was a terrible moment. Well, of course, I survived, and of course, they put me in with somebody else, or they did. A man by the name of Jim Haichu, who died a couple of years ago, and Jim and I had known each other at Takli, Thailand. He'd been there about 6 weeks longer than I. We didn't recognize each other. We changed so much. But I couldn't walk, and they kind of pushed me in there, stumbled in there, and I wouldn't look at Jim. And I started explaining to him what a failure I was. He said, "You're Leo Thorsness?" Anyway, he said, "Leo, just knock it off." He said, "Don't you know?" He said, "Everybody who went through that type of interrogation, they either died or they broke, or they did both." And it was I've never felt so elated, so wonderful to be average. Man, average is really good. Okay, that's all of that. Communications. You all know the TAP code. It's in the book. And there will be a test before you get out of here because you got the book. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J. There's no K, so there's L. We threw K away. L. So my initial LT. L is the third row down, first one. So you tap row and then column, and T happens to be. Let's see if this works. Here's LT. 4-4, right? That's where T would fall if you looked in there. And by the way, for a long time after Johnson and McNamara, probably two people have been fun to live next door to, but they had no idea how to run a war. And so they stopped the bombing. There was nothing else going on in North Vietnam. There was no lever to get us out. There was no pressure. They stopped the bombing for several years. When that first happened, the North Vietnamese told us that America stopped the bombing because their defenses were so good, we were afraid to come over, so we just couldn't do it anymore. But whatever it was, we knew they'd stopped them, not for that. But So right away, we knew we're going home because that's all the commander-in-chief had to get us out was the pressure of bombing up in North Vietnam. And then the days went by, and then the weeks went by, and we started falling. And I mean, we hit the bottom so hard. For years, we sat there. So it was a difficult time. And then the first 3 years, as you know, were pretty brutal. Torture was not period. It was off and on, kind of regular. They wanted a lot of propaganda. They knew the equipment pretty well. It wasn't that. They just wanted us to make anti-war statements and all that. And they would torture you to write a statement saying you're being treated well. That's happened to me more than once. I mean, how ironic. But the TAP code was so essential. And 2/3 of us there were Air Force aviators. A third were Navy, and there were 5 Marines. That was just a breakout. The Marines were close air support near the DMZ, like they fly, and then they were captured and brought north. And General here, Metcalf, and he and I are Air Force, and if he were on the other side of the wall, once we learned the tap code, you can tap back and forth real quietly, and the guard doesn't hear you because they hear you, they beat you, but you get most times you. So we can tap about 15 words a minute. Are there anybody here with naval background? Yes, sir. You sir. Anybody with Marines background? Okay, I'll make one up. So you're Navy, and so if you and I were tapping back and forth, I would slow down to about 11 words a minute. And in case there's a Marine or somebody's got a Marine in their family, we didn't teach those 5 Marines the tap code, right? But I always say they were tough enough. They didn't know. But really that may or may not be true. But once you put pajamas on people and you don't bathe and all, you look and smell about the same. And it's hard to tell one service from the other. But that was our communications, and it generally worked. It was essential to communicate. If somebody was tortured in this cell 1, and you live in cell 2, and they start another purge this week or something, and they want propaganda about if he can get back to the cell at night, and if he can get himself to the wall and tap to you what it is they wanted, what types we had names for what type of torture they used, what he finally said if he had to say something, what lies he told him to keep them simple. It was a bad night because your turn tomorrow, but you were a lot better prepared. I mean, life and death sometimes depend on communication. It still does. Ours was very fundamental, but good communication, simple communications that you don't mix up what's being said, or be it with the technology we have now or with the tap code. It's just essential. A little bit on surviving, tough time survival. When we came home in 4 groups, and when the last group was home, no one POW at the time, we'd talk to DOD and said, we don't want to talk about torture till the last guy's out, because if we start talking about it too soon, they may keep the guys there or take it out on them. So we didn't. There was no. And when the last group was out, they said, okay, have a press conference. I was at Scott. You were closest to your service, to your home state, which was, for me, it was Scott. There were 3 press conferences, West Coast, Mid Coast, or Mid, and same time. And there were 3 of us, Dave, Wayne, and I, and I forget, there were 4 of us. But they said, make a statement and answer questions. Any questions the media had. So we did, made a short statement. Right away, the first question was, were you tortured? Yes, we were. Why were you tortured? Well, mostly for propaganda. Okay, well, how did they torture you? Well, they used the suitcase trick or the rope trick or whatever the names get. What does that mean? So we kept answering, and their eyes got kind of bigger and bigger and saying, really? And then it was hard for them to believe us, but we were sitting in the hospital. We had the scars to show them. And they did, but it took, and then there was a kind of a pause, and then they said, how did you do it? How did you get through those tough times, time after time? And we answered it, but we should have, I wish I would have said, we talked about it afterwards. We didn't answer it well, but we talked about it afterwards, and here's how the POWs, some of the ways the POWs got through tough times, and I think it applies to a lot of people in a lot of situations. Everybody here has been through a tough time in your life. Probably everybody will have another tough time. Whatever that relative is, it's tough. Number 1 is the will to survive is really strong. You just don't give up. Number 2, it has to do with time. And everybody here has heard it or said it. I'll take it a day at a time, going through this tough time, whatever it is. For us, we said, you're by yourself in these really difficult times. Generally, you're always by yourself, and there's always a bunch of them on you. You'd break it down. You'd say to yourself, I think I can last another minute. I think I can last the 30 seconds. Rather than saying I can get through this session. It didn't make time our friend, but it didn't seem to be as much of an enemy. Number 3, it took me a little while to come up with it, but the word is love. And at one time was with Jack Bomar, who died recently. Really tough, good man. And it's the only time I've ever been tortured with somebody back in boy Jack and I in a little cell. And when it's his turn, you hear things snap or pop or sounds coming out of the body. You do anything you could for him. You love that man so much. And I think the lesson I brought home with me was when you're with somebody, either by design or by accident, going through a real tough time, if they know that you care about them and give them a hug or whatever, spend a little time with them, hold their hand, that's meaningful. I guess we call them support groups in one way. And my wife has been through cancer like a lot of people have. But support groups are being with someone that they know you care helps a lot. Love that person. Another way of getting through tough times, we were blessed with more than our share of really outstanding men. I didn't know the tap code when I got there. Fred Cherry, somebody, a little black guy, tough as nails, been there a year longer than I or so, and he was in heartbreak. He'd broken the rules, and he was back in there being brutalized, and the new guys went in there, and so he started the tap code, and obviously I didn't know what it was, so he just got down by the bottom of the door. He wasn't in the stocks right there, and hollered as loud as he could, so I understand it. It took about 20 seconds, or what I told you. And, of course, he knew what would happen. Just beat the living hell out of him for a couple of days. But we were blessed with a lot of Fred Cherries, Jack Bomars. We were blessed with more than our share of good. And I think every organization is. The thing that surprised me, some of the people who would step forward and actually make a ruckus to the point where somebody's being tortured and they weren't sure they're going to last another day, somebody else would go out of their way to do something really obnoxious, and they'd stop over here and they'd start on this guy and probably sit. But anyway, some of the people who stepped forward to help you were surprises. They were some scrawny little guy. They weren't big, tough, handsome. It's sometimes they're the people you would not expect were going to be your strongest helpers in tough times. And I won't say it's the last way, but I got to stop on this issue. But the last way I'm mentioning, it doesn't come in last, is there were times when I was not going to make it. I was simply not going to make it, and some prayers were answered. Somehow strength and that helped me through those prayers, those spirituality gifts. Now, just a little bit on tough time on humor. We had some really great times over there. We laughed, But I lived one time in a cell, and this is true now. You're going to say, "Oh, come on, it's just true." I lived in a cell block, looking down the top. Here's down in the middle, and there were 6 cells, and there were a total of 9 POWs in there. We lived together for a long time. That combination, and with the tap code, you have to live. You just can't sit there in fear every day and hope that you don't hear the keys jingle at the wrong time, and or at night. So we started tapping the jokes that we knew with the tap code. And even there, if you have good timing on how you tell your joke, it's a little better, But if you tap long enough, the long jokes they were probably the best, but also the odds of getting caught and it's dumb to be beaten for trying to be funny, right? So we try to shorten them down, then they'd lose the value of the joke and so on. But after a while, there were only 9 of us, and it turns out fighter pilots and aviators are very good at what they did. I've become better now that I've retired, and I think back how good I was, like a lot of us. But one of the things none of us had any skill at was writing humor. We just had no skill at that. So all we had were the jokes we knew. And after 2 or 3 times going around, and eventually you get caught, somebody gets beaten over it, we said, "Look, we know all the jokes. Let's number them." And we did. We truly numbered them. And now, man, you can tell just like, and there's no question. Whenever somebody, if they tap, their timing is good to tap 21. That was the knee slap. You could just about hear the guy laughing in the cell. By far the best joke was number 21. and it was such a good joke. But I can't tell you. I'd have to kill you what it was. But it had to do with a lady walking in the bar. But we did have humor. And one of the tough things in our family is the families always imagined the worst. And it wasn't always the worst, especially the last 3 years. Torture became abnormal. We lived in big cells. But anyway, we had periods of humor, and some of our humor was pretty sick. It's not something I really talk about here, but there seemed to fit there. Just a little bit about leadership. 2 of the best examples, and I'll try to make them summarize. But 2 of the best examples of leadership I've ever seen. One is if you log on Google and any of them, you just type in Mike's Flag. A lot of you know what that is. It'll come up, and it's taken on a life of its own. And that started when I was a Washington State Senator during the Flag Amendment period. That was about 1990 or so, I remember. And I'd never spoken about being a prisoner of war when I was in the State Senate. And so that amendment came up, and we were debating that Flag Amendment. So I stood up and told Mike's Flag. how that happened in prison. And somebody's up in the galley wrote it down, and they sent it in a Reader's Digest, and it was published. And that's kind of how it started. But Mike Christian happens to be from Huntsville, Alabama, where we live now. I'd forgotten that, so we moved down there. But Mike scrounged a piece of cloth. We were outside. You strip you naked every so often. Mike found a little gutter, rag in the gutter, got it in, cleaned it up best he could, tattletale gray. And we had mosquito nets by now, and treatment was a lot better. This was about a year to go before we came home. And at night, he was working on this thing, and you can find bamboo everywhere over there, and with sliver bamboo. We had one blanket. It was the kind you could strip a thread off. It's different than they make them, I guess, today. So we had a needle and a thread. But the last year and a half, we got some medicine. It was blue. We had no idea what it was for, but they always say, here, medicine. And it was blue. and also tile roof, red tiles around the world. You could sneak a little pat in the cell, take a little water, grind it backwards. It'll become kind of a maroon color, pasty stuff. So Mike had red, which is a maroon, and blue medicine, and a white handkerchief. And he's got a needle and thread, sew little stars up in the corner. Took him about 2 weeks. And Mike and I were good friends, and we talked about what he's doing. And I said, Mike, and other people said, you know what's going to happen to you. Well. So Mike, it took him about 2 weeks to finish. And one morning, before the guards were around, he got out and he kind of stood up and hey, gang, look here. And he waved this little tattered cloth. And if he used a lot of imagination, it looked a little bit just a little like the American flag. But I think every one of us, we were scruffy and we popped to it. We were so proud of that. It was the best looking flag we'd seen in 6 years or 5 years. And about every 2 weeks or 10 days, he'd run you outside, strip you of your clothes, and 2 sets of pajamas, and you had one to wear. And they found it, of course, in the sleeve. And night interrogations are the worst, but they came that night, and it was just so brutal. And even before they got him heartbreak, you could hear it. And sometime after midnight or wee hours, pushed him in. He couldn't talk. His eyes were closed. Some bones were broken, and just discolored. And it was a terrible beating, but torture. But Mike was walking again in 2 weeks, and he could talk, and he started looking for another piece of cloth. Just tough man. He was just a handsome young guy. Ned Schumann led us in the Lord's Prayer, knowing full well that we wanted to have church, and when we moved into the big cells, and they didn't let us the first Sundays, so we complained about it, and Ned said, are we committed to hold church, have church? And everybody, yeah, and he said, no. There were 43 of us, and that's a big step right after we moved out of solitary. A lot of people, and it was great. But so he went around by name. He said, Leo, Charlie, Jim, Chuck, are you committed to hold church next Sunday? 42 people said yes. He was the senior ranking officer, the 43rd. And so he knew right then he's going back to heartbreak for torture. But Ned was a true leader, great raw leadership. He said, okay, we have a goal of holding church. We're committed to hold church. We all knew what that meant. He said, what's the plan? So we made a plan. This is Sunday morning came. We started gathering up a bat in the cell, and they came in with some guards and so on, like they did the Sunday before when we first tried this. And they had guards, English-speaking interrogator, had guns, and Ned said, not a problem, we'll be quiet. We'll do quiet church for 10 minutes. And church in a communist prison camp, didn't go over real well. But they instantly grabbed Ned, hauled him off to heartbreak. Second ranking man stood up, walked to the center of the cell, and said, gentlemen, the Lord's Prayer. So we started reciting the Lord's Prayer. We got about halfway, and they weren't sure what was going to happen. We thought we knew what would happen. They did. Finally, they figured out. They grabbed the guy and hauled him to heartbreak. Same thing. Number 3 didn't get as far in the prayer. Number 4 probably got 5, 6 words. Our Father who art. And we were drowning out the interrogators. Stop! Guards are running around, hitting people with guns. It's just chaos. And fifth ranking man is way back in the corner. He's taking his time, and I'm not blaming him because I'm number 7. I begin to wonder about this plan. But everybody was committed. But anyway, just before he got to the center of the cell, somehow it just became, instantly quiet. And the interrogator said something to the effect that this isn't working. Let's go. We'll try something later. And they took, number 5 with them. Went out. 5 people went into our torture. 5 people survived, and we held church on that Sunday till we came home. A great victory. They held all the aces, but it was so meaningful. But I'll never see better raw leadership than that. Ned knew he was going to be tortured. Knew it for sure. And everybody else that stood in line, we didn't know how far they'd go. But every person to a man. But Ned was the leader. That's as good as I'll see. Just a little bit on a couple more points, and we just have some Q&A or something. What's important in life? About a year to go before I came home, we've been at big cells now, and they moved us around some, and even then, but there were 20, 30, 40 of us in a cell generally the last 3 years. And we all had different gimmicks on ways to pass time. We could talk out loud now. We held classes now. Whoever knew the most about anything, they claimed that they claimed they knew everything, and we had no way if they knew the most. So we had classes and stuff, but no pencil and paper. But one day I came up with the idea: I'm going to keep track of what we talk about. What is it we spend our time talking about? And we're all aviators, right? Most of us are fighter pilots. And I thought, well, I bet number one is going to be our job, because that's it's a great job, and they pay us to have this much fun with it. But I kept track, and you mentally did things just to pass time. I built a little file cabinet. I put some little files in there, papers, and I had had blue medicine. So imaginary. I put 4 marks and 4 marks. When this topic, this. And after about 2 weeks, I found out we only had about 20 things we talked about. Just about all our time was devoted to these 20 things. And guess where work came in? 17. It hardly came up. And I'm not saying work is important. You feel good about doing it. You do your job well. You have milestones, and you get promoted, and you provide for yourself. Work is important. I'm not knocking it all. But in the big scheme of things, what was most important to us when you're pulled away from all this stuff, this laboratory we're in? There were 4 things that dominated our conversation. It kind of moved around, but they all, unfortunately, I could put an F. Our faith, our friends, our family, and fun. That's what we talked about. Moving around some, maybe family was just about always first. But faith, family, friends, and fun. Those are important things in life. And the point I make is, especially young people who are out there working hard and hustling, moving on. Don't get so wrapped up like I did as a young lieutenant. I'd fly all week, and my wife would give me kitchen passes, and I'd go cross country on the weekend, and so I'd get better, and maybe I'd get promoted faster or whatever. But don't pass up some of those really important things in life. Friends, family, faith, and fun. They're going to last you forever. So enough on that. I just want to make one more point, and I want to talk about freedom. And it's in the book, I think. I was in a solitary cell. It was a camp. They called it Camp Punishment. They took 36 of us. Long little building, long down the middle, and chunk, 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 chunk. And there were 36 cells, and they were 5.5 by 6 feet. We found a way to very accurately measure it. And the advantage of living in a 5.5 by 6 foot cell, you don't have to worry about jogging. And if you're not into jogging and stuff, you got a good reason not to. And also the advantage is if you wake up when you wake up in the morning, you reach out like this, you can touch everything you know. It's all right there. But I spent about a year there, and they called it Camp Punishment. We called it Skid Row, and it was kind of a camp punishment. But about once a week or so, once every 10 days, a guard would come, and this is when they're still those first 3 tough years. They didn't want you to see each other, so you couldn't communicate. And if you can communicate, you can organize. If you can organize, you can resist, or at least resist better. That's another reason we had to communicate. But they tried to keep us from that. And the guard opened the cell door once in a while. And by the way, when the guard opened the cell door, so it was, those first 3 years at least, every time you'd hear the key, and you had to stand in front of your cell. And then if there were 1 or 2 of you in the cell, when the door opened, you had to make a full 90-degree bow. And you just dumped your bucket out in the sewer every 2 or 3 days. And when you came back in, you had to get back in front of your door, and you had to make another full 90-degree bow when they closed the door. We call it their form of humiliation, intimidation, and degradation. It was just nothing in the Geneva Conventions. It was just their showing their control over us. And they gave us Vietnamese names. If you used, Major Leo Thorsness, they beat you, knocked you down, pulled you around by your hair, or whatever. So it was a obnoxious treatment, and it was just their proof of they can control us, I guess. And you live with it. It's how you survive. But the guard, one day I was taken down to the end of the building, walked down to the end of the building. There's a little piece of concrete, slimy, a faucet in there. It dripped some, and you could turn it up a little bit and get a little bit more. And you took your cup with you, and we always kept a cup, an old rusty cup in the cell. And you get maybe 2 or 3 cups and pour it on yourself, and then the guard would say, go in. And that was your bath for the week. But I found a little rusty nail by a piece of concrete there, and I was able to slip it in when the guard wasn't looking, and got it inside the cell. And the windows were bricked up, so we couldn't see out. But they'd put the bricks in this way rather than this way. So the mortar was, pretty thin. It wasn't a great quality mortar, but with that nail and enough time, and that's what I had, you could drill a hole in the mortar, just a little teeny peephole. And I did that. And when you weren't there, you'd put a little dust or something in there because they'd come in and look or see if we could see out somehow. But I would spend hours looking at that little peephole. I had my eye right up against it, and I could see like this aisle, a little slice of life, 2 or 3 degrees out there. And a POW would walk by. You didn't know who they were, but with a tap code, you'd find out who went to interrogation, so now you know what they looked like, kind of. I'm a farm kid. One day, a mother hen and some little chickens walked by. Now, that was big news for a guy from Walnut Grove, Minnesota. And there's chickens in the camp, and everybody, really, how many are there? What kind? It was big news. It killed a whole day talking about little chickens. But guard would walk by, and one day as this guard walked by, and I didn't know his real name, and he knew my Vietnamese name. As that guard walked by, this is the image that all of a sudden it just came into my mind. I hadn't thought about it before. I visualized myself flipping a coin, and I caught it and I put it down, and I remember it was a dime. I visualized, and I looked down. It was so real. I took my eye off the little people. I looked, and sure enough, it was heads. Which that meant that the guard I just seen walk by out there had tails. But the thought behind that was just profound. The thought behind it was it just by the flip of a coin that my parents were American and his were Vietnamese? How did I luck out? I could have been here. There's nothing wrong with being a Vietnamese. There's a lot wrong with being a Vietnamese, and you're born in Hanoi or somewhere around there, and your job is to guard and torture prisoners. That's bad. And I thought that kid out there will never have a chance to marry who he wants. Maybe he certainly can't go to school. Won't have the opportunities. He'll never fly a fighter airplane. We had just by. And my thought was just the more I thought about this, I thought concentrate on all the rights and the freedoms and opportunities we have just by our birthright, just by the flip of the coin. We're born here. It amazed me. What a great thought it was. And I concentrated, and then I got thinking about the world, and I thought, Leo, and at that time I figured out, it was 1967, I thought probably 3/5 of the world lives under some form of autocratic government. And 2/5 maybe or so, but certainly we in America. And I thought, and I started realizing, I could have been any of those other million or billion people out there. And it finally settled in on me that made a major difference in my attitude about being a prisoner, and that is that if I die today, I'm ahead of the game. If I compare myself to the rest of the world, it was just that freedom. It's the first time I was able to kind of make freedom just about became real, just about touchable, just by watching him and looking at that people and those thoughts that just flashed through my mind. And ladies and gentlemen, you have just given me the freedom to use about 37 minutes of your time. I hope you got a good investment out of it. And